So we're going to look at inequalities. Now this is our number line. I'm going to start with what we do know. And we probably already know equals. So we could say A equals 3. And we'd put that on a number line as being there. And we'd label that as A. And we can do that with all kinds of numbers. We could say B equals -4. And at -4, we write the letter B. We could look at C equals 0. And so here's 0 on the number line, and we call that C. And let's just do one more for the hell of it. Let's do D equals 8. So we put a dot at 8, and we call that D. So what we already know about the number line, we can summarize that as saying a dot means equals. Okay, so if we've got a dot at 4, we know that means equals, but what if we took over the arrow and the rest of the number line and went that way? Well, we could say A equals 4, but also that A is greater than 4. And we can see that because there's the greater than symbol right there at the end of the arrow. And that's our greater than symbol there. So we can actually combine these two symbols together. And we're going to say this actually represents A is greater than and equal to 4. We could do that in another way. We could say, what about if B is greater than or equal to 7? So we'd start at 7 and we draw our arrow across like that, and we can see the connection there. So now we can write another rule. We already know that a solid dot means equals, but a solid dot with an arrow means greater than or equal. So if we say A equals 4, we'd have to put a dot at 4. But if we wanted to say B is greater than or equal to 6, we would start at 6 and we'd include all the number arrow and that number arrowy pointy bit there. But you might be starting to think to yourself, well, what if I had a point C and it was just greater than 3? Then we'll choose 3. Well, what we're saying is we want to start at 3 but not include 3. So we're not equals. Remember, equals is a solid circle like the green dot on the 4 or the purple dot on the 6. But this is an empty circle. It's an empty circle. So it's just greater than 3. It's just the arrow for 3. So let's start building up our notes again. So we know that a solid dot means equals, and a solid dot, that's equals and the greater than. So that means greater than or equal. And then an empty dot, that doesn't include the equals, does it? So that just means greater than. So we're building up some good notes here. If you're following along with this, this is the kind of thing that you should be putting into your summary notes. Okay, so we've built up a bit of knowledge so far. So we have got the solid dot means equals, and we've got the solid dot, that means equals plus this greater than thing. So that means greater than or equals. And if we don't want the equals, we just do an empty circle, and that just means the greater than part. All right, well, It's not going to take much for you to figure out then. If we went in the opposite direction, instead of the arrow going this way, like we got over here, the arrow is going to go that way. So we can just simply say, again, our next symbols are going to be starting with equals, but going the less than direction. So that means less than or equal. But if we don't want the equal, we leave an empty circle, and then we do our less than symbol. So this one means less than. And so we can probably think on our arrow, from the arrowheads, that this direction is greater than, and then this direction must be less than. All right, so if someone asks you to draw the inequality, and these are our inequalities here. This is what we mean by the inequalities. These are all inequalities because they're not the same as this guy up here. That's the equals, yes? All right, so if I was to say A is less than or equal to -3, well, I start, where do I start? I start at my -3, and I do a solid circle. Why do I do a solid circle? Because I can see there's an equals in there, and less than, that's where the arrow is pointing, so it goes all the way like that. If I wanted to say B is greater than 2, I know my starting point is 2, but I don't color in the circle because I've got no equals symbol. So I just do an empty circle and show my arrow going like that. So that's how we do inequalities on our number line. And those things I've put in the red circles there, they look pretty good for putting on your notes. Okay, so let's start putting some of these things on the number line. We might put them a little above or below the number line, otherwise it's going to be a bit crowded. But let's start with A. Now A says we're at 4, so we're just going to do that a little bit above there. I'm going to say 4, and we did a solid circle because we could see we got that equals. And the arrow, like the arrowhead on the number line, is pointing that way. So that is A. We don't have to make the line go all the way to the end. It's going to continue on forever. -9 is definitely not the end. It's going to go to negative infinity there. Let's look at B. B starts at 0, but there's no equals. So we do a little open circle. And it's greater than, so it's going that way. And that's B. And if we look at C, C says equals -5. So that's just C there. Do a solid circle for equals. And you can then do D. D, we're starting at -3. So we've got an equals, so we do a solid circle. And the arrow's pointing that way. And we can label that one D. And then E. E is greater than 2. So we're going to put a little dot for 2. If you go down, you'll see that's where 2 is. And oh, that's not right, is it? We're going to have to scribble that out. What did we do wrong? It needs to be an empty circle because it's just greater than, there's no equals. And so we can draw the arrow going like that. And we're going to call that E. And then the last one is F. F is less than 7, so closed circle or open circle, no equals, so open circle, less than, that's the way the less than arrow is pointing, it's the way the arrow points on the number line, and that's F. So there we go, we got all our points on the number line. Okay, so now we've got the symbols on the number line, we want to now find the equations. So let's start with A. So we've got A, and the arrow is pointing to the right, and it's colored in, so that means it's also an equals, and where is the dot? It's above the 6. All right, let's try B. So B, the arrow is pointing to the right, but there's no colored in circle, so we don't put the equals, and we're starting at -4. Let's try C. So we've got C, the arrow is pointing to the left, we can see that there, and it's colored in dot, so we must put the equals in there, and it's -5 is the point on that number line it's above. And now we go to D. Now D is just a colored in circle. What does that mean? It's just equals. There's no arrow to think about, and the dot is above the number 2. Let's have a look at E. So we've got E, and the arrow is pointing to the left. That's for less than. And we know we've also got the number -1. We didn't have any equals, so we don't have to put the equal symbol on there. And then F. F is pointing to the left. It's colored in, so we have an equals, and our point is 5. So let's just remind ourselves, this way means greater than, and the arrow pointing that way means less than. And that's how you do inequalities.